Okay, welcome back. In this video, we are going to talk about emotions and how to be mindful of them. So, mindfulness of emotions and body are not separate practices. They are actually part of our fundamental practice. In fact, paying attention to the breath is a way to be present in the body. But we do practice mindfulness of body and emotions a little bit differently than we do when we're working with the breath. So we just worked with mindfulness of body in the last video. You learned how to do a body scan. So now that you know how to direct awareness into the body, we are going to talk about emotions. So what exactly is an emotion? Well, modern neuroscience defines an emotion as a complex, multifaceted phenomena involving a combination of physiological responses, subjective experiences, and behavioral expressions. These responses are often triggered by internal external stimuli, processed through various brain regions, and mediated by neurotransmitters and hormones. That's a lot of words, and I don't expect you to know this or understand it even. So I'm going to actually break down and simplify this a little bit better. So emotions are complex experiences that come in and out of consciousness at any given moment. They can be triggered internally, like by a thought, or externally by something happening in our environment. So it is registered by different brain regions, and then the brain sends electrical impulses through the nervous system, and this is where we feel the emotion. So this is why we call emotions feelings, because we actually do physically feel them. Our emotions can influence our thoughts, our decisions, actions. They can be the driving force behind everything we do. And they can range from basic instinctual reactions like fear or more complex and nuanced states like love. Emotions are typically attached to the thoughts and the stories that we tell ourselves. And as you know, human beings are wonderful storytellers. So we tend to be incredibly attached to our stories. We take our inner monologues and our thoughts, our beliefs as absolute truth. And we often believe that another person or an event is the cause of us feeling a certain way. So while another person or event can cause the emotions to arise, they're actually more of a catalyst to our emotional upheaval. So I'm going to give you an example of something that happened to me not that long ago. For a little backstory, I was with a man for almost 10 years of my life, and he was both physically and emotionally abusive. So we were both alcoholics and had an incredibly toxic and codependent relationship dynamic. On several occasions, my ex-husband had grabbed me by my throat and choked me until I was almost unconscious. So for the past couple of years, I've been training martial arts. And one day I was in a jujitsu class and I was working with a male partner who was relatively close to my size, very kind person, somebody that I'm comfortable with training that I know relatively well. On that day, we were doing drills on the rear naked choke. So by at the beginning of the drill, I was fine. It was no big deal, just normal day of training. And we were walking through the steps, and I was very focused on my technique. And as we became more comfortable with the technique, we started to move a little bit faster. And as we started to move faster, my partner had me in the choke, and I started to feel a panic attack coming on. Logically, I knew I was safe, but my body had something else in mind. So this is an example of how our external stimuli can trigger an internal emotional response. This is also an example of how we become caught up in our emotional reactivity. So while this was happening, I had the opportunity, and I'm fortunate to have this practice because I was able to bring my awareness to that moment experience. I noticed a lot of tightness in my chest. And if you've ever had a panic attack, you know that this is sometimes people feel like they're having a heart attack because it is a lot of tension and it gives the sensation that it's difficult to breathe. So there's this tightness in my throat also that made it very difficult for me to speak or communicate. My hands, usually when this happens, tend to become kind of cold and balled up like this. And then my whole body had this intense energetic kind of movement like this. And I almost started to cry, actually. Now we're going to dissect what was happening. My mind created a story based on my previous experiences or previous causes and conditions, as I like to say, you hear often in this type of practice. And this story, based on these causes and conditions, was not a true reflection of what was happening in that present moment. But the energy that was surging through my nervous system was a real experience. I really experienced this. So, this is an example of how something can simultaneously be real and not be true. This is a demonstration of how our thoughts and our beliefs, along with our mental conditioning, can shape what we perceive as reality. So, the emotion that I experienced was fear, and it was extremely unpleasant. And again, we use this term feelings to describe our emotional experience because it is actually a felt sense in the body. The strong sensations that I experienced are just part of this physiological process. My brain registered an externally perceived threat based on my previous experiences with that, right? And what happened was my brain perceived this and it sent a lot of electrical signals to my nervous system, right? It said, you need to either run or fight. And that gave rise to the sensations of a panic attack. It's very energetic because it's to help protect me, to keep me safe and get me out of there, get me to safety. So this is an example of what is commonly known of, which is commonly known as our fight or flight response. It also includes freeze, so fight, flight, freeze response. This is controlled by the primitive part of our brain known as the amygdala, and it is more commonly called the lizard brain. So it sent me this message to fight, flight, or freeze. Now, why did I perceive my training partner, somebody who I know and I'm comfortable with, as a threat? Again, this is based on my previous conditioning. So my previous experience was true danger. My ex absolutely could have killed me. So my subconscious mind learned from this experience, and in order to protect me, it went into protection mode. So more than my previous experience with this, there were probably some other factors at play in my conditioning. So like example would be lifetime of stories about predators and needing to feel like I need to protect myself as a female. Maybe it's the way that my mother taught me to stay vigilant. So these are just explanations of how we become mentally conditioned, and that our previous experiences can actually dictate how we perceive or react to the present moment experience. The past is not real. The past is gone. It's just stories we tell ourselves, but we have learned so much from the past that we can actually experience the emotions that we felt in the past in the present when we connect with these stories or conditions. I'm willing to, and I'm willing to bet that you have experienced something like this in your life. Maybe it was fear. Fear is an extremely strong emotion because it's supposed to keep us safe. Fear can prevent a lot of people from taking action or doing things. Fear almost prevented me from becoming a teacher or starting a business. So, why do we practice mindfulness of emotion? In short, it's to create space either between an internal or external stimuli and how we respond to it. There's a really great quote by Viktor Frankl. He says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, we have the power to choose our response. In our response, it lies our growth and our freedom. Most people operate completely unaware of their mental and emotional processes. I think most of us can probably recognize this. And due to our unawareness or their unawareness or ignorance, people become emotionally driven and they take actions or inaction for that matter based on their present emotional state. Everyone has experienced strong, unpleasant emotional states like anger or fear, and then reacted in a way that was unfavorable. Surely we've all said or done something that filled us with regret later. So this is an example of our emotional reactivity. If we learn to bring awareness to our present moment experience, then we actually notice that there is space to respond with wisdom rather than being emotionally reactive. And this is what Viktor Frankl meant. We all have what is called a window of tolerance. And when we are within our window of tolerance, we can respond to our experiences wisely and logically. When we go outside or when we're nearing the edge of our window of tolerance, then we start to become more emotionally reactive. So our brain is like this. This right here is the amygdala. This is the brain stem, and the fingers here are the cortex. The cortex right here is where we access our logical thinking, reasoning, problem solving, decision making. And when we go outside of our window of tolerance, we lose access to all of these. We cannot make rational decisions or think logically. So practicing mindfulness actually helps to widen our window of tolerance by making a little bit more space for us to respond with wisdom. And this space is actually cultivated by recognizing an emotion first. We recognize it, and then we allow it to be there. We're not trying to push it away or fix it. Then we can begin to investigate. We investigate the felt sense or the somatic experience in the body. Now, most people have a very narrow window of tolerance when they first start working with emotions, and this is normal. So when you first start working with emotions, you will probably recognize that you had gone outside of your window of tolerance after it has already happened, and perhaps even after you have said or done something that maybe you wish you wouldn't have. Of course, they say hindsight is 2020. So you might recognize that you were caught up in your emotional reactivity, went outside of your window of tolerance. Maybe you raised your voice or said something that you didn't mean to, something that was hurtful either to yourself or another person. If you get frustrated with something that you did, you might call yourself names. This is very common. So, as you gain more experience working with this practice, this mindfulness of emotions, then your timeline to recognize what had happened will start to shorten. So, first, you'll notice what had happened after it had happened with hindsight. And then over time, the more you have stability or the more experience you have practicing or working with emotions, then it shortens that time a little bit. So one day you might not realize that you reacted unfavorably until a couple of hours later, even. That's when you start feeling regret or remorse. Over time, you'll start to notice it immediately after it happened. And then, even with more time, you're going to notice it as it's happening. Then, with more awareness, the more refined your awareness becomes working with this, you will actually catch the arising of the emotion before it becomes a problem. You'll start to notice the very subtle aspects of it arising. I like to say that progress in this arena, progress with this practice, is measured in nanoseconds. It takes a long time for you to actually gain enough experience to be able to recognize it before or as soon as it's arising. Now, I mentioned before that our emotions are usually connected to some kind of story that we tell ourselves or have told ourselves throughout our life. We may even feel stuck in an emotion because of a looping effect, actually, that happens with our thoughts. So, a thought or story triggers an emotional response in the body. And then that emotional response, typically because it is unpleasant, causes us to mull over the story. And we just keep doing this back and forth, back and forth. And it seems to create this sort of never-ending cycle of suffering. There is absolutely some good news because, according to modern neuroscience, an emotion, when not attached to a thought, only exists in the body for about 90 seconds. And while 90 seconds seems like a very short time in the great scheme of things, when you are caught up in emotional reactivity, particularly a very unpleasant emotion, it can feel like an eternity, like longer than a microwave minute. So as you tune into your internal world, you will begin to notice this as a process. Then you can remind yourself that the story is just a thought and it really has no inherent existence. It's just phenomena arising in consciousness. And then you can remind yourself also that it's a temporary state and that it's going to pass. So now you will learn to observe thoughts as nothing more than phenomena arising in consciousness in the next module. So for now, this is just kind of conceptual and not experiential for you. In Western culture, and as English speakers, we relate to our experience by using identifier words. I am. This way of speaking doesn't appear in all languages or cultures. So for example, if I accidentally knock over a vase in the United States, I'm at a friend's house and, it goes down, crumbles or crashes to the floor, I would say something like, "I'm so sorry that I broke your vase." In many of Eastern cultures and languages, they would recognize it as an accident already, and then I would just say, "Hey, the vase broke." Some of these ways of communicating do not even necessitate an apology because it was an accident. It was recognized as an accident. So we can start to recognize that even our language begins to condition the way that we react and respond to the world and how we experience things. So if we remove the I or I am from the experience, we wouldn't say I am happy or I am angry or I am afraid. We would just notice the experience as simply fear or anger or happiness. And they're nothing more than a field of sensations when not attached to the story. So, as we do this, we begin to recognize that we are not our emotions and our emotions are not us. When we are no longer identified, I am fearful or I am angry, then we can offer that emotion some kind and gentle attention. Then the entire experience begins to soften and become more spacious. And you can actually learn to be okay and even welcome these unpleasant experiences. As a reminder, this is a practice and will take time to learn. So please be kind and gentle with yourself. If the emotional experience is too intense and you become hijacked by a train of thought surrounding this emotion, then paying close attention to the emotional experience may not actually be productive because you might experience difficulty navigating a way out of it. So if this happens, it's okay. In fact, it's even advisable to return to the breath or your chosen anchor if it sounds, and let the experience recede to the background of consciousness. Now, as you work with this, you will eventually begin to gain very deep insights about your mental and emotional processes. Even if you need to redirect your attention to the breath and allow the experience to recede, it's okay because you are still becoming aware of it in that flash of a moment where you're like, "Oh, what's this?" That's awareness, and you're gaining more awareness as you practice and experience this. So if the experience becomes exceptionally intense and is causing extreme discomfort, then you might consider even shifting to another activity, like going for a walk. This is sort of a distraction, yes, but sometimes it's needed when things are too much. Otherwise, you end up getting caught up in the hindrances like aversion. So if we are experiencing something that is extremely unpleasant, we're attached to the story and we just seem to perpetuate this never-ending looping effect. One example is I had a friend a couple of years ago that went through a pretty traumatic breakup. And for at least a year, it was this constant looping effect for her between the story that she kept trying to tell herself or trying to figure out what had gone wrong, which caused the experience of extreme emotional discomfort to arise. And it seemed for her like it was never ending, like she was never going to heal and get out of it. So this is the aversion aspect. It was the not wanting to feel what was happening. Now, if you are experiencing this quite frequently in the beginning, the more you work with this, there is something known as the waterfall effect. So the more we bring awareness to our emotional state, the more we realize what it is that we're doing to ourselves. So if you happen to have difficult experiences or emotions, and the more you work with this, if it seems like it's becoming worse rather than getting better, that is known as the waterfall effect. This is not so much that you are getting worse, it's just simply that you are noticing how often your mind ends up going into this patterned response. So, actually, this is a good thing because if you start to notice this a lot and you're like, wow, I'm doing this so often, you're gaining awareness. Let me give you an example. When we have a very difficult emotion, it is up here, it's high, right? We have the most intense experiences, and our awareness of that is very low. Every time we bring awareness to the emotional experience, we're sort of touching this, and it's just in a flash. Unpleasant emotional experience, awareness. Every time we notice this, it starts to go down and awareness starts to go up. And over time, they actually meet in the middle, where our awareness is the same strength as the emotional experience or patterning or conditioned reality. And what happens is once we have gained all the awareness that there is to gain of this experience, it sort of releases and lets go. This is what I've talked about when I discussed the letting go aspect of mindfulness practice. The fact that we cannot intentionally let go, it's more of a side effect, right? It's a side effect of becoming more aware of our moment to moment experience. Letting go is something that naturally happens as we gain more awareness and stability. And again, I mentioned before, my favorite teacher, Mingyur Rinpoche, says this is about short moments many times. So just keep working with this. And if you need support, please feel free to reach out. And in the next video, we are going to talk about Vedana, or mindfulness of feeling tone. Thank you very much.